Good afternoon and welcome to the Trinity P3 webinar, Why Measuring Your Carbon Pollution is the First Step to Sustainability. My name is Darren Woolley. I'm the CEO of Trinity P3 and joining me today is Sewell, the CEO of the Gaia Partnership, and Phil Benedictus, founder and CEO of Benedictus Media. Before we commence, I'd just like to do some housekeeping, and that is that we will be going for 1 hour. We've started on time, so we should be finishing at 5 p.m. Australian Eastern Summer Time. There's an opportunity for Q&A, either as we go through or at the end. So simply use the Q&A function. Questions and responses can be anonymous. And also we're recording this for future use, and you'll be receiving a link within the next 24 hours for the recording. So to our speakers today, or our panelists, the first is, and from left to right, Sewell. Now, Sewell works with me at Trinity P3, but he also has a company called the Gaia Partnership. And Christopher and I go a long way back because in 2006, he came to me and said, Darren, I've got this idea of being able to measure the CO2 emissions of marketing activities. And I said, production, Christopher? And he said, no, everything. And I went, that sounds like a damn fine idea. So he's been working on that through the Gaia Partnership and with Trinity P3 since 2006. Welcome, Christopher. And
Thanks, Darren.
And also,
it's been a long time. Yeah.
We have Phil Benedictus. Phil is the CEO and founder of Benedictus Media, which is a B Corp. And he's also the inaugural winner, if you look at the picture there, of the Climate Comms Champion, which was awarded 2 weeks ago at Mumbrella 360. Welcome, Phil.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here.
Now, so just to take us through the agenda, what we want to do is, first of all, talk about the various sources of carbon pollution, because I think anyone that's joined us today definitely has an interest and a commitment in addressing the climate crisis. And so the first thing to understand is what are the sources of carbon pollution? And we use that as a general term for greenhouse gas emissions. Of course, it's not just CO2. There's a whole range of chemicals that contribute to global climate change. But we're going to talk about scope 1, 2, and 3. Then we're going to be talking about how to determine your carbon footprint, because it's the first step in looking for ways of reducing your carbon footprint, and why carbon pollution reduction can also reduce waste and save you money. So this is not just a cost exercise, it's also an opportunity for improved efficiency. And then finally, sponsored by the Gaia Partnership, Christopher's going to do his pitch on how the Gaia Partnership can help you in that process. I hope everyone's very comfortable with this. Christopher, Phil, you ready to go?
Ready when you are.
Terrific. Okay, so scope 1, 2, and 3. You know, this is from Plan A, and it comes from the greenhouse gas protocols. What basically scope 1 is direct contribution. So, you know, and Phil will be sharing with us in a minute, but let me just go through these definitions of the things that he certainly went through as not just part of his B Corp accreditation, but also as part of working with his clients. What can you look for around in scope 1 that you can directly impact? Then scope 2 is more the indirect things, that, such as the power, heating, water, cooling, and for your own use. Then finally, and this is probably the biggest part, but it's also the most complicated for marketing and advertising, is scope 3, because this is what they call upstream and downstream activities. So from an agency's point of view, this could be when you engage with external production companies, or you're engaging with the media owners in providing upstream and downstream media opportunities. What's the impacts there and what needs to be accounted for? Gentlemen, would that be a fair overview? Do you want to add any more to that, Christopher or Phil?
No, Darren, I think that's a good example. And most companies today have been working on what is scope 1 and 2 a lot of that comes from the electricity bill. So how to change your light bulbs, how to do things a bit more efficiently, either around the home or around the business. So those are the easy ones. We're now, the focus is now coming on scope 3, which is the things that aren't as easy to measure, but also they are huge when we actually look at the materiality of what's occurring in a business's total footprint.
Okay, well, look, you know, probably a lot of people, because when we did the survey for Comms Declare with the 200 agencies, and Phil, you obviously filled in that survey because, you know, you won it. So
That was the methodology, yeah.
It was interesting because a lot of people really struggled, while a lot of agencies had either policies or intention. A lot of them were really unsure about what were the steps they should take. Do you want to share with us what were some of the things that you did when you were focusing on your environmental impact?
Yes, for sure. And I should point out before I even start, obviously, I'm not an environmental expert. I'm someone who runs an ad agency, in all honesty, I had to have scope 1, 2, and 3 explained to me by Darren and Chris. So that should hopefully be reassuring that this is all quite doable. In our case as an agency, we were set up in the first place never to work with clients that we felt were polluters or promoters of bad practice with fossil fuels, or indeed poor labour practice or other sort of unethical business practices. So which I'm guessing comes into scope 3. But it sort of gave us a sort of solid base to build from. But after that, the first few steps, as Darren said, really are like a combination of, you know, being smart about your energy use, both for cost and planetary reasons. So and being smart about recycling. So it really just ticking the kind of boxes that we all, I think, like to think we do, but sometimes don't actually put into action. So stuff like, you know, avoid unnecessary use of plastic, avoid unnecessary use of paper, recycle. When we kit out the office, we would go for second-hand furniture, which just doesn't mean it was weird looking, like we go to Gray's online sales and repurpose furniture, some other stuff we got that was recycled. Just making sure that our energy use is limited, so that lights get turned off when they're not in use, that screens get turned off when we're not using them, and indeed computers, that we put energy efficient light bulbs in, similarly energy efficient heating, and followed, you know, protocols in summer to keep a steady temperature in the office rather than allowing it to fluctuate, so we'd use bigger bursts of energy. So a lot of those first things are really, it's stuff that your CFO would tell you to do, even if your sort of corporate responsibility or, you know, eco team weren't telling you to do that. Then I guess, and this is where for me, forgive me if I get the line blurred between scope 1 and scope 2. So moving into scope 2, we transferred our power supply to a green supplier, Power Shop, meaning that all our electricity is offset on the plan we work on. We make sure that we buy recycled paper, both office paper and toilet paper. The coffee in our whatever you call it, Nespresso coffee machine is made by a bunch called Pod and Parcel, who make entirely biodegradable pods. So it's just thinking through stuff like this, where can we make our footprint smaller? Similarly, we encourage our employees to choose an ethical super fund. We work with an ethical super fund, so that helps there. Studies in Norway have shown that if you move your super to an ethical fund, certainly for Norwegians, I don't know what the numbers are for Australia, or even if they've been done, your impact is 27 times greater than if you just make your own personal life as environmentally friendly as possible. So, you know, starting to look into those secondary sort of areas like that. Again, encouraging staff to walk or use public transport, cycle to work wherever possible, and equally wherever we can to walk or cycle, walk to meetings rather than taking Ubers, and noting down Ubers so that it can be offset at the end of the year. And then getting into, and so all that stuff I would class as being basically sort of pretty simple, really. It's, I mean, arguably it's not that simple to stop working with polluters if it's already a key part of your business's finance, but you know, once you've made the decision, it makes the amount of harm you can do as a comms agency very much smaller. But after that, you're looking at, as per the title of this webinar, looking at your carbon footprint and how to reduce and offset it. Now, we had gone through pretty much all of this process that I've described before we got there. So happily for us, by the time we looked at the footprint, it wasn't too scary. And we did that as part of working out a more concrete plan on how we were going to be able to commit to hitting zero emissions by 2030, which in turn was an initiative we joined having become a B Corp. And it was when we became a B Corporation back in 2016 that a lot of these actions that we'd been taking, we were actually able to codify into having a firm, this is our code of how to work in an environmentally friendly way. This is our commitment to getting to zero emissions, and so on. And actually that B Corp accreditation process, well, it doesn't fall into necessarily the completely easy bag. It's not that difficult either. And if nothing else, just going through filling out the form for the accreditation gives you quite a good picture of where your business is at in terms of where it needs to be. It won't give you a carbon footprint in the way that, say, Chris could, but it does give you a nice, clear sort of picture of, okay, here's bits of the business where I'm nailing it. Other places, say you might have problems with supply chain or whatever, where you need to make some tweaks.
Sorry, Phil.
Oh,
just
no,
to jump in there. I'm wondering what the reaction is and what the interaction is with your clients, because if you're not working with polluters, I imagine you attract a lot of clients that have similar values and similar aspirations. What's the interaction that leads to between you and your clients?
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. We work with a lot of NGOs in the environmental space. We have worked in the past with political bodies who are more environmentally inclined, both at party level and some independents. We work with, for instance, as I say, an ethical super fund who is a fellow B Corp. And yes, it opens doorways on that side of advertising. In our case, we also, as part of our B Corp purpose, if you're a smaller climate or social justice based org, we will always sort of say yes to working with you, even if it's not necessarily going to be a very profitable client for us. You might be a smaller client or whatever, to try and make sure you get really good outcomes and that we're doing our best to do good. But it gets very positive responses. It's currently, sadly, it makes us quite different to a lot of the industry. So for us, it's a very good differentiator. And we're seeing a lot, increasingly, of projects in the commercial space who are interested in that, whether it be, and these aren't necessarily clients like, people like Belong Mobile, for instance, who are busy offsetting your mobile, because who knew it? Your mobile use every year is a tunnel, maybe was it 2 tons? I forget. It's a lot of CO2. And so they can offset that. That might be one of the tweaks we could do still as a company, is put our phones with Belong, for instance. So yeah, I find it opens up opportunity. It's also very strong in terms of recruitment and retention of staff. Media can be and advertising can be quite a murky world. Stuff like working for you when you're transparent and doing your bit for the wider community, as well as your bottom line. So I think A, working with the right clients, and B, helping them pitch the conversation in a useful way is key. I mean, if there's one problem I think we've run into with many of our clients in the campaigning sector, it's that often, and sorry, far be it from me to tell creatives how to do their jobs as a media person, but often the language that's used is very good at activating the base, but not particularly good at moving the middle. And I think it's very important that if you are the middle, or if you are, you know, a business that hasn't yet started taking these steps, you know, don't be put off if you can only take one or two of them to start with. Like every bit helps. And in the end of the day, when coal first appeared on the scene a few hundred years ago, it was it was the basis of a great societal change that was very positive for a long time in terms of rebalancing equality. We can't all feel bad for all of that, but now we know what it's doing. Maybe we should adapt our behaviours. No, I'm sorry, no maybe about it. We should perhaps adapt our behaviours. So I think we need to move away from that whole mind frame and help brands move from mind frame of this is stigmatizing to this is something we need to deal with.
It is the point, isn't it, Phil? And Chris, if you want to come in here, that a lot of people are actually, there seems to be a great desire to do something, but people are stopped because they think you either have to be well and truly on the way to zero net emissions, rather than taking these, what are relatively simple steps.
I think that's right. And I think even when, one of the areas I've been talking with Chris about is his work on how to reduce campaign carbon emissions. And we were talking about an irony that the only clients of mine who, before we've approached them around the topic, who've talked to us about it, are clients who are worried about their assets appearing on buses or bus sides, because they think that that's going to be a bad optic. But as Chris would tell you, that's actually not a particularly heavy carbon footprint for a campaign.
So we're stepping into scope 3 here, aren't we, Chris? This is when we start talking about media options, where that would scope 3.
Yeah, so I think what Phil's doing is doing the best he can around the business. I had a question before we jump into there. Have you found this is cost you money, Phil, or is this actually if you stood back and said it's taken me a bit of time to get going, but is it an expensive exercise?
No, I mean a lot of it saves you money, because the first thing you're doing is making sure you're using fewer resources. I mean overall I don't know, by the time we've paid our registration fees for B Corporation, it might balance out a bit. But if it is a cost, it's not a big cost. It's not something I've really noticed in the books.
No, I think the original move towards offsetting everything has created a sense that being sustainable and reducing your carbon footprint is actually a cost impost on people, because even with airlines now, there's always the additional cost if you want to offset your flights. There's a cost with power companies if you want to have renewable energy sources. Everything seems to come as a cost, when in actual fact it's more about not offsetting but actually reducing, and particularly reducing waste, wouldn't you say, Phil?
Yeah, absolutely. And as I say, we were kind of lucky in that we'd done a lot of that reduction before it actually occurred to us to measure our carbon footprint. And yeah, those things they're business efficiencies, i.e., places you save.
Yeah, so I suppose that comes.
Sorry, Chris.
Sorry, after you, Darren.
No.
Yeah, okay. So I suppose that segues nicely into everyone, all advertising agencies, media companies, and marketers can actually get their own house in order. But then it's actually, when we actually go about our day-to-day business, what are we doing to influence and guide the money that we spend on our clients' behalf, or to actually produce, to promote goods and services? What are we even thinking about the carbon footprint? Let's keep it simple with carbon, forget other environmental factors. What are we even thinking about what effect that has on the planet? And I think the easy answer has been, up to recently, not really. No one has. We do recycle, we do reduce our electricity use, change the light bulbs, but then off we go and recommend we use, any form of, channels without even considering what the impact is. And I think that's an example you gave, Phil, that we were discussing about on the side of the buses. A bus is and that's a perception, I think, more than an environmental problem. A bus is is mass urban transport. It should be encouraged. Before COVID come along, it was a lot more encouragement than there is now. But we had something, well, we should all not be taking Ubers. We should be using public transport. So if public transport carries a poster that promotes a client's goods or services, that's not adding any weight to the actual vehicle itself. Therefore, the emissions aren't going to go up. Therefore, the only emissions that the client should be responsible for are the manufacturing of that poster and the disposal of that poster, which aren't very big. And we discussed before about the media company who's providing those services seems to have it backwards. They're saying, well, you can offset the emissions of that advertising. And I think they're playing into people's misconceptions about it. And they're actually including the running of the fleet of trams that your poster's on. And that seems completely wrong. Yes, it's good marketing. It allows a bit of conscious-free stuff to be going on within the organisation, but it bears no resemblance to reducing carbon in the actual in that channel itself. That the trams run, they carry people. We're just renting that space for a small amount of time. The trams will not stop running if we take that post advertising off it.
So, Chris, on that point, you're saying that if you're renting the space of something that's already existing, you don't have to take all of the carbon contribution on board, just the bit that you add to it. Chris?
Yes, you're actually, the difference you're making, sorry, from a carbon emission point of view is the manufacturing of that poster. That's right. The only difference you're actually making to the emissions around that tram moving around, not the tram itself. It will continue to run with or without your advertising. It's a nice revenue earner for.
Yeah, we've got some problems with Chris there. So I was going to say that. Sorry, Phil.
Keep the prices down, but a completely different conversation.
Yeah, we're having some trouble with your bandwidth. You keep freezing. Has something happened?
Is that mine or Phil's?
No, we're fine. It's actually you.
I was just going to back up what Chris was saying, though, that actually the client similarly did want to offset the emissions of the bus because they were afraid of the common misconception that somehow by advertising on a vehicle that could be seen as being polluting, they would be perceived as supporting pollution, when in fact it's really not the way. So it's about people moving away from that PR optic to a more real way of looking at emissions.
Yeah, one of the good comparisons for mine is mobile billboards where they get a trailer. Sometimes it's pulled by a motorbike, sometimes by a truck, and you can have it positioned or driving around. In that particular case, 100% of that setup is actually purely there to carry your advertising. The vehicle is actually contributing no other function or service other than advertising. So, Chris, in that particular case, 100% of the CO2 emissions from that, a mobile billboard would have to be accommodated or compensated for by the advertiser, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think if you put what's the worst polluting media you can actually put your messaging on, it would be on those posters that are being dragged around by big diesel trucks. That would not tick any box from an environmentally sustainable way of actually promoting the goods and services. I think maybe the only other one I'd say would be worse would be skywriting, sending a plane up to actually put your logo in the sky. because that's, again, there could be a lot of fuel used in those ways. But if you start thinking about it in that manner, it's actually, it's quite obvious you shouldn't do that if you're trying to sell an environmentally friendly product. Don't drag it on a truck.
Well, I don't know why, but a couple of weekends ago, we had Trump 2020 sky written over Sydney. So that was quite, I think it failed on two accounts. One is the CO2 emitted during it. Secondly, the huge amount of wastage, because I don't know many people in Sydney that were actually voting in the US election, but who knows, maybe it was a cost-effective media choice. What would you say, Phil?
It wouldn't be something I would advise.
No, I wouldn't think so.
I doubt I'd be working with someone who was asking for that advice, to be fair. But
look, one of the other things that I think is comes up a lot is this idea of, the print industry gets quite a lot of hammering for, being environmentally damaging. And yet people are inclined to think that the digital technology comes off scot-free. Have you heard that, or do you hear that around town, Phil, from your clients and things?
Yeah, they seem to be blissfully unaware of the footprint of digital media, which is ironic as it's considerable. I've heard a figure quoted, and I'm sure Chris can correct me, that every Google search is about the same energy as a kettle of water boiling. Google in some respects are not such a bad supplier. Certainly in the US, their energy is 100% offset, as I understand it, or from clean or renewable sources. But if you think how many searches you do in a day, that's a hell of a lot of kettles boiling.
Yes.
And that's just Google before you get onto, say, Facebook, and start considering how you're consuming that digital media. Is it part of that ton of emissions that your mobile phone is giving out at the consumer end? Is it on a larger screen, and so on and so forth? So yeah, digital gets a peculiarly free ride, because if you think about it, it's using energy both at the source of the company that's putting out the digital and at the consumer end. So it's kind of got a double footprint.
Mm.
Yeah. And it's also got the footprint.
You've done work in this space, haven't you, with University of Sydney around Facebook ads?
Yeah, and the other thing is that file that's actually gone up there, that's actually, because it's going to sit there forever, basically, on a server. And I think if you think about energy efficiency, and a lot of noise comes from Facebook and Google about how they're installing, like there's no tomorrow, they're installing solar panels. The reason is because they eat so much electricity. It's a large percentage of the US, mostly with companies like Amazon, is going straight to feed the servers, and they're trying to locate them in colder climes up in the Arctic as well, because it's actually keeping them cool enough, and it takes a lot of energy. So. And Moore's laws tells us that everything's expanding. The files are getting bigger and more complex that are going up, and most of that is marketing. The marketing communication is getting more sophisticated. It's getting higher quality. We know we've just had problems with our bandwidth here, that we try and watch any show and have when the ads come on, how big those files are we're seeing. That's taken up a huge amount of space on those servers, and it's going to stay there for a long time, because normally they don't get deleted. They're sitting in quite a few places. It's very, very energy efficient.
So what I'm gathering from both of you is that the biggest issue for digital is really the electricity consumption. And in a country like Australia, which relies heavily on fossil fuels to generate that electricity, you're going to have a significant carbon footprint. In countries where they have, largely renewable energy, and the extremes are Iceland with geothermal, and others with wind and other sustainable. Does that mean that digital is a much better option, or a more environmental option? Is it because of Australia's fossil fuel electricity generating that we're particularly bad?
Well, it depends where you are. When we're talking about, the term I use is the consumption of that communication. If I'm sitting in Darwin or I'm sitting in Hobart, my energy source is coming a lot from hydro. So therefore, it's not got a big carbon footprint. If I'm sitting in Melbourne, there's still a lot of brown coal burnt down there, so that consumption is got a higher carbon footprint. But the problem is, even if you're consuming that in a cold place like Iceland, with some geothermal going on over there, the data's normally going to be in a server far away in another country, which is most probably the States, you know, because a lot of this stuff is actually, the big server farms are actually located there. So therefore you're still getting a big carbon footprint going on the storage part of all this digital technology, not just the consumption side. So it becomes a more complex story, but say that's why we did go to the University of Sydney to unpack that, to have a look, you know, because the belief is, oh, it's digital, it must be good. I think that it's actually not correct. Digital, it's bad because it's actually cheap and wasteful a lot of the times. There's a lot of impressions go out there that no one actually clicks on. It's still eating up a lot of, obviously a lot of, generating a lot of carbon emissions from that activity, which is not a good thing. It's wasteful.
Mm. Is media becoming a bigger consideration, Phil, for clients that are wanting to be more environmentally sustainable, wanting to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions?
Yes, I think so. I'm not sure that we're at a stage yet that, because of the prominence, particularly digital plays in lower funnel. Sorry, there's a bit of background noise. Am I coming across clearly?
Yep, it's fine. Thank you.
Good. I think that at the moment you'd be looking at people wanting to offset rather than changing the funnel, because I don't know what else they would see to necessarily fulfill its purpose. But there is a growing awareness. For instance, the IPA in the UK have got a group within the IPA that one of its two recommendations, this is an environmental group with it, or sustainability group within the IPA. One of their two recommendations is for media companies to start measuring the footprint of their media plans and looking at which media are more harmful than others. So there is a growing awareness, but at this stage there's still, you know, I've got fairly green clients. It's still not something that, for the most part, is not something that the clients are asking me about. I think mostly because they don't realize there's anything we can do, that people like Chris have actually gone as far as working out models to be able to offset. And I think it's more down to a lack of knowledge in the advertising community than a lack of will to do it. I think there are plenty of advertisers we could be talking to who would like to address that footprint. And
especially when there's a corporate imperative to actually, you know, when there's a commitment made at a CEO or board level to achieve their zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 or 2050. Some have taken the long bet. But Chris, what would be the approach for a marketer, do you think, of, you know, if they're in an organisation like that, what would be the first step?
Well, I think the first step is to understand what sits in scope 3, and you know, they've been counting things like travel, which have been in that area, but they've not actually been counting marketing. So they've got to actually realise it's part of their responsibility. And once they've made that decision and they start including it, then it's the first step is actually just to do an audit, basically, of where they sit today. If they do have a commitment to 2030 or 2050 to get to net zero emissions, they need to actually be clear what they're including, which must be their marketing spend. And then they need to understand it. And then many people can actually advise them on better ways to go to market. But this is not an anti-business conversation either. It's actually, how can you be more efficient? How can you target better? How can you avoid waste? The same things you do within an office environment, we need to do when we're actually going out and actually promoting goods and services. If you take the example, the one I always like is, if you look at the perfume, for instance, if you look at their total spend, 40% of their total spend is spent on marketing. It's the packaging, it's the advertising, the actual, the flavored water that goes into the bottle, the manufacture of that. Yes, they can actually reduce the emissions around the way that factory operates. But if you're spending 40% of your total spend on marketing, you must include that in your count.
So 40% of cost of goods.
Cost of goods is marketing.
Including packaging and
packaging and advertising. Yeah. So you can't ignore that. You can't say we're doing a great job environmentally if you have no sight on where that's going.
That reminds me of our very first project, Chris, with the green beer.
Yeah, that was again long time ago when things were a bit different. Yeah. Yeah, but that was again.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'll go on that one. So it was Australia's first carbon neutral beer. Therefore, to be carbon neutral, you've got the dog there, Phil.
Just chasing a cat. I might have to intervene. I know.
That's the joys of Zoom, isn't it? Yeah, so they were promoting Australia's first carbon neutral beer. And that was great. So they made sure the bottles were offset. They actually made that sure the plant was operating efficiently, measures what the emissions were. They did a full life cycle analysis of everything around making a beer and getting into the shops to sell it. What they forgot was when they actually went to tell people to go and buy this carbon neutral beer, they didn't include the marketing. So they came to us because we have been doing this for a while, and we measured the emissions. And the standout one was they had a lot of super sites, and they had the beer being promoted, and they had a lot of pot plants and trees they put on these super sites. Looked fantastic, and they were saying how green it was. It actually looked from a creative point of view, it looked fantastic because you had these green bushes, and these were actually sucking CO2 from the atmosphere as you consumed their beer. But what happened when the sun went down was these massive floodlights lit up the posters so we could see them all through the night, and they hadn't included the emissions from the electricity used on those massive posters. So once they understood it, they were good. They just hadn't included it. They hadn't even thought of this should be their responsibility, and then they had to spend a bit more money to make that carbon neutral as well. Yeah? Well, I suppose they had a better.
I feel, so Chris,
they know what they.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry, Darren. I think what the good outcome from it was the poster sites actually ran away and got solar panels and installed those straight away. So the outcome was reduced emissions, not spending more money on carbon offsets.
Absolutely. Well, I feel we couldn't have an advertising conversation without showing some work. So this is a outdoor poster at a train station that I saw earlier today. So the bank that doesn't lend to the fossil fuel industry is the bank Australia needs for Bank Australia. Now, Chris, from your perspective, purely, let's say on a production basis, what would be the things that you would need to consider in the production of this? Because this is not a digital out of home. This is a traditional skin.
Okay, so to measure the emissions from this space we are renting, so we're not responsible for the space itself, but we are responsible for the concept development, the artwork, the file preparation, and then the major emissions from this would be on a vinyl. Therefore, it's actually going, and there's a printing press which runs on some form of electricity. We're not even going to have a conversation about the embedded carbon in that machinery. Let's just talk about the emissions from actually producing this work. You've got obviously the substrate, which is the vinyl. So you'd actually measure this. You do it on size. It's quite straightforward. What's the substrate? How big is it? That's in 4 colors. Therefore, it's on a big machine. A big digital machine would pump this out. So we could measure the emissions from that. That would be far more than the actual production side of it. And then you'd have the disposal. The assumption is these aren't recyclable. It's not on paper, it's on a vinyl substrate. Therefore, they're going to sit in landfill for the rest of their existence, which will be longer than you and I are around. Therefore, there's and emissions will come from that. They'll actually break down and things will come out. So we'll put also what carbon comes from that as well. So there's the life cycle of building it, manufacturing it and then disposing of it, those three things give us what the footprint would be for this poster itself.
Now, if this was a digital out of home that allowed it to have programmatic material delivery, so in other words, that it could be delivered from a central server to it, there'd be different costs, but also different carbon calculations, wouldn't there?
Yeah, the first two would stay the same. There'd be a concept developed, there'd be a file artwork done, a file generated. This would be a different file. It would then be pushed down a pipe, digitally down a pipe, and then displayed. You wouldn't have the manufacturing of on a substrate, but you'd have it actually displayed with the electricity consumption used to drive that digital display. For how long it's actually up for. So if it's on a 15-second roll and it runs for 3-4 months, you can calculate how much electricity that's actually using for when that display is up, and therefore you can actually see where it is regionally. If it's, as I said before, if it's in Darwin or if it's in Hobart, it's going to be lower than if it's sitting on a train station in Victoria. So you can calculate the emissions from that digital poster as well in the same way.
So the big difference is also the fact that this is not, first of all, it's currently manufactured on a vinyl and has to be transported here and then disposed of afterwards. Whereas the digital out of home, it's sent from a server through pipes to appear on here. But then, of course, this has no lighting at the moment.
No, that's right.
Whereas the power consumption, the electricity consumption would be significant to run that 24 hours a day, wouldn't it? If it was a digital out of home.
Yeah, again, there would be, again, in this example, it's on a train station. You would imagine it will be lit from that's not, where is that? Okay.
That's at Summerhill, and I checked, there's no lighting on it.
Okay, that's good.
There's lighting in the vicinity.
Yeah.
That's safety lighting, not for the actual poster.
Yeah.
So in that case, it wouldn't be countable because it's there as a safety factor. That's
correct, yeah. And that needs to, so people don't trip up the pavement. That's not there to enhance the communication. Therefore, that would not be included.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to say for brands like like Bank Australia, there are companies that will use smart skins that are recyclable. We've done this as well with Australian Ethical, and that you can choose a type of, actually I have no idea if it's a type of vinyl, but a substance that they can print on that then gets turned into civic furniture and bits of play, stuff like that. So again, you can reduce the footprint of it. Sorry to interject.
No. Phil, I think it's a debate and a conversation for another podcast. Recycling is one that, yes, we should recycle it if there's nothing else we can do. But the first thing we should do is try and reuse something. We can't reuse those, but it's actually the energy required to turn those posters into a piece of furniture. It's actually still going to create carbon emissions. So yes, it's good. It's not going straight to landfill, but we can't say we've washed our hands of any responsibility because that's a good thing. It's not as bad, I'd say. It's the best they can do to put it on a poster is to then recycle it. But it's if it was on paper, which they used to be, you could actually recycle that paper. But but again, it would most probably, I don't know, the carbon, even if you put that paper into a landfill, it's locked up lots of carbon anyway inside it. So again, a different, longer conversation. But when we do this work to calculate it, we take into account all those things. But yeah.
So it seems to me, Chris, and I want to move on, that part of the first step is to understand the various options available to you and what the implications are. Because if you're going to optimize your carbon emissions, then you actually need to understand where those emissions are coming from and what the alternatives are, and whether that's actually going to reduce emissions and what the cost implications are.
Yeah, and it's, the conversation started today with Phil explaining how he looked at everything that was going on, with a process around B Corp. To understand all the emissions within an organisation. It's exactly the same principle you apply. Where are all the emissions around that channel you're looking at, or that object you're actually manufacturing? You do the same thing. You draw a boundary around it and calculate it. Yeah. And the trick, I think, here is in a consistent manner. It needs to be done in a consistent manner. If people are approaching this and doing it in a different way every time, you've got no way of comparing things. So we've had our system out, the CO2 counter, for now 12 years. We've stayed consistent in how we arrive at it. It allows companies to benchmark where they are and over time reduce, so they can see an actual reduction or an increase, whatever it might be, because we've used the same methodology in a consistently applied manner. Because there's standards around this, it's tricky to track down. We've commissioned quite a bit of research in this space, and we'll continue to do that because there isn't a lot of work in this area. So, but we do need verified data as much as we can get.
And your CO2 counter, you've applied that in the past to all sorts of things, from media optimization to production to direct mail and point of sale, haven't you?
Yeah, any form of marketing. So all those, and we also include the transport of the goods as well, which is a far simpler calculation, which is the weight or cubic size of the goods, the mode of transport, and the distance it travels. So that one's far easier than when we start delving into complex Facebook, media plans. Where we actually talk about clicks and views and all those other things. It's far more complex, but yeah, we do any form of marketing we can actually measure. We've kept that data up to date.
Thanks, Chris. Hey, Phil, yeah, having a media focus, I know you do content, but primarily Benedictus Media is a media agency. You'd be optimizing at the moment with all the normal things that media agencies optimize on, things like cost per thousand, getting reach and frequency, accumulative reach and that type of thing, right? Phil? Oh, I think we've lost Phil now. He's frozen.
Yes, Phil?
Can you hear us, Phil?
I think the dog bit him. No?
No, the dog chased the cat, and now Phil's gone. Okay. What I was going to say was that the ability to actually optimize media against all of those things and CO2 emissions would be possible, wouldn't it, Chris?
Yeah, very much so. And I've been obviously having these conversations with various people, and it is, here's your reach, here's your frequency, here's your cost, and here's the emissions from these various ways you can go to market. So again, we're encouraging people to look at the options and make a decision. If your cost is the same, your reach and frequency is the same, why wouldn't you make the decision to go in a channel based on how low its emissions are? If that's what you're trying to do as an organization, to go, reduce your carbon emissions by 2030, go to net zero. It would seem a logical thing. It's not anti-business, anti-advertising. It's let's actually all think about this and work together up and down the supply chain to find the optimal way to actually go to market to sell goods and services.
Phil, you're back. You're on mute.
No.
No.
There you are.
Oh, good.
Did you hear what I was saying? Which was, clearly in media already you're optimizing against an audience. You're looking at things like reach and frequency, cost per thousands, media multiplier effects. There's so many different ways that media's optimized as part of the strategy planning and the trading process. Could you see a future where, as part of that mix, the CO2 emissions or the greenhouse gas emissions could also be optimized?
In a word, yes. I mean, I mean, we already have clients who are concerned about it, as we covered, not always in the right ways, but who are asking the right questions. And I think that conversation is becoming more widespread. I think that because of the mechanics of which, how different media do different functions within the sales funnel, I don't know. I think there will be different optimization solutions for different parts of the funnel. I don't think it's necessarily going to be as easy as, well, let's shift our TV impacts to outdoor impacts because we think those have got a smaller carbon footprint, because equally you have maybe 2 to 4 seconds on average in front of the piece of outdoor as opposed to 30 seconds of a TVC. So there is an issue about these media work in different ways. But yes, I think it's a conversation that's starting, and I'm in my discussions, I'm finding an awful lot of people are interested in it. Just as I mentioned before, I think the main stumbling block at the moment is people not realizing that we can measure this and look to optimize. Yeah.
Great. So I've just noticed the time. We've got about another 4 or 5 minutes. Chris, one of the areas that you've often talked about is waste and reducing waste. So to the point that we made before, which is that reducing your greenhouse gas emissions should not be a cost to the business if you do it properly in the first place. You know, it's about reducing waste. Quite publicly, there was a big discussion in the trade media here around Coles reducing their printed catalogue contribution and moving to an electronic option, an opt-in electronic option. And the print industry came out and said that the electronic option was more polluting than the catalogues.
Yeah, there was it's how you interpret and present the data. So they were saying they were taking, let's call it 1 million copies of their catalogue. It was a lot more than those that are going into letterboxes, and comparing that with multi-million digital sends. And they were saying a like by like, the digital would be more emissions. And you could work that data to say correct, but you can't just take the total number of catalogues that were reduced and divide it and take the total emissions, because most of those catalogues are wasted. Yeah, I think that you could say, let's be kind and say 5% are actually read and consumed. The other 95% are put straight into hopefully the recycle bin, but somewhere else. So therefore you have the total carbon from producing the whole million should only be divided. We should only take in 50,000 of those should only be taking the carbon. Therefore it'd be a huge actual carbon footprint if the ones are actually consumed. And the other thing that was occurring, it must be less carbon from the choice that Coles made, because they were doing two things. They were already delivering the catalogues digitally, and they were putting in the letterbox by printing them. If they turn either one of those off, they must be saving emissions. So obviously the printing industry were defending their territory as they are paid to do, but they used the data to favour their argument is incorrect. It was clearly the right thing to do by Coles. We should junk mail's junk mail.
That's a fabulous concept there, Chris. Phil, you know, suddenly Chris has brought cost per viewable impression of programmatic to the catalogue world, hasn't he?
Yeah, it's a concept I really like, because this is getting to real effectiveness and efficiency also in holding media owners accountable for value.
Well, yeah. So instead of saying, well, 1 million emails and 1 million catalogues, so which one's which? Well, let's start talking about what was the actual impression that was made, and then divide the number of those impressions into the total carbon emissions for that activity, then starts to use carbon as a measure of effectiveness and productivity rather than just efficiency.
Yeah, exactly. And as I say, I think at that stage, it's where business and efficiency and environmental best practice join together.
Well, look, I just want to do a round with both of you. If you are giving advice to either agencies or marketers that are considering committing to a zero net emissions, what would you say should be their starting point? Phil, I'll start with you.
Well, if we're looking at their advertising spend, the first thing is to look at it's going to be both your production in terms of media footprint, and talk to someone like Chris about it, and then also your media plan. You know, as we've seen, some digital media can be very carbon heavy, some media which, you know, are perceived as being bad in terms of carbon may be better. So make sure you're clear on all of that. Obviously, don't be selling coal while you're doing it. But yes, I mean, it really is about starting off just really thinking about what the carbon footprint of your advertising is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I what Phil said, but I'd come back a step, because I think marketing shouldn't be sidelined on the conversations that are going on from a business's environmental policy. They're working on the factory, working on distribution. The marketing is sitting there not actually adding any value apart from maybe doing some ads. They need to take responsibility as well. So it's up to marketing to talk to the sustainability area and get what is scope-free emissions included in the count. Because there's a lot of work that could be done, and they can get some really benefits to drive down their carbon. They are responsible for it. They've just got to realise that actually it's something that needs to be counted. It can't be ignored anymore. Marketing.
The same advice, but now for agencies and other suppliers to the industry. So, you know, it could be agencies, it could be media proprietors, whatever. Do you have any specific advice for them? Chris?
I'll go first this time. Yeah, for advertising, and you know, they're different part of the supply chain. They need to understand it's not about just being carbon neutral. It's about engaging with their customers and offering a measurement around, or a validated measurement around what they're actually producing. They need to actually demonstrate that, but it needs to be validated. They can't really do it themselves. It won't be trusted. It needs to be done independently. And therefore, you know, it just would change the clients will be asking for it. So you need to be ready. Either do it in a hurry when they ask for it, or start planning it now.
Okay. And I think Phil's just hung up on us, so perhaps he's uncomfortable giving that advice. Oh, now here he is. Phil, you got some advice for media owners?
Yeah, look, for media agencies, I think the big thing to me is, on top of all the stuff about looking at your own footprint, the scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 stuff, is we are in the business of sending out signals to change people's behavior. Make sure you're getting people to change their behavior the right way. You know, coal's not all right. Gas isn't a viable sort of interim solution for cleaner energy. Don't be helping clients greenwash where they can. I think in terms of advice to publishers, obviously I'd be much happier if they weren't running stories around greenwashing. I'm in a bit of a difficult position, because in Australia, certain media owners have such dominance of the landscape that whether you believe in what they put out or not, if I'm going to do the right thing ethically by my client in reaching a target audience, for instance, governmental audiences, I'm going to use certain news outlets who don't necessarily say what I would see as being the truth around climate change. And that's a really hard ethical bind for me, and one I don't have an immediate answer to, but it would be nice to see a code of practice for news reporting that took into account the truth about climate change.
Well navigated.
Yeah.
Look, we've run out of time. I want to thank you, Phil, for joining us, and also congratulations again on winning your inaugural Comms Climate Champion. And to you, Christopher, thank you for your contribution today. It's been terrific.
Thanks for your time. Thanks for the opportunity.
Okay, so recordings of this workshop will be available soon. You can find them at trinityp3.com/webinars, but we'll also be sending out an email in the next 24 hours with a link to it. If you've not already subscribed, please subscribe at trinityp3.com/subscribe. And that will keep you up to date with all the things that are going on. Here we go. thank you for joining today. If you want more information on any of the issues today, this was our 18th webinar this year and our final one for 2020. We'll be back in 2021. So please subscribe and we'll let you know what's happening. In the meantime, that's our social media connections. We're in Sydney, Singapore, London, New York, and Zurich. And again, thank you to Christopher Sewell and Phil Benedictus for joining us today to talk about this important topic. Thank you all.